My name is Nadia Brooks, and I'm 32 years old. 3 months ago, I walked into the Grand Meridian Hotel in Hartford, Connecticut, uninvited. 200 of my mother's closest friends, colleagues, and admirers had gathered to celebrate her 35 years as a respected financial advisor. When I stepped through those ballroom doors, she was at the podium, mid-speech, talking about integrity and the sacred trust between an advisor and their clients. She saw me and froze mid-sentence. I smiled, walked calmly to the gift table, and placed a single manila envelope among the wrapped presents and crystal vases. Then I found a seat in the back row and waited. 2 hours later, when my mother opened that envelope in front of everyone she'd ever impressed, she found what was inside. Her face went white. The room went silent. Papers scattered across the floor, and someone in the front row picked one up and started reading out loud. She hasn't spoken to me since, but I answer every call now, every single one. Before I tell you what was in that envelope, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. To understand why that envelope ended my mother's career and reputation, I need to take you back to when I first realized I wasn't her daughter. I was her investment. I grew up in a white colonial house in Glastonbury, Connecticut, about 20 minutes outside Hartford. From the outside, we looked like the American dream. Fresh paint, manicured lawn, 2 cars in the driveway, a basketball hoop that nobody ever used. My mother, Elaine, was a financial advisor who had built her own practice from nothing. She'd started as a secretary at a wealth management firm and worked her way up, studying for certifications at night, building a client base one referral at a time. My father, Richard, worked in insurance. He was a quiet man who preferred peace to conflict, which meant he preferred my mother's version of events to anyone else's. My older sister, Chloe, was 3 years ahead of me, and she had everything. The grades, the gymnastics trophies, the bedroom with the bay window and the walk-in closet. She had the college fund that grew every year, the private tutors, the SAT prep courses, the brand new car on her 16th birthday. She had our mother's attention, our father's pride, and our grandmother's pearl earrings promised to her before she was even born. And then there was me, the afterthought, the accident, the one nobody planned for. I learned early that there were 2 kinds of daughters in our house, the investment and the collateral. Chloe was the investment. I was everything else. I was 8 years old when I first heard my name used like currency. It was a Tuesday evening. I remember because Chloe had gymnastics practice and the house was unusually quiet. My father was working late, as he often did when my mother had important calls to make. I was supposed to be in bed, but I'd crept down the stairs because I heard my mother's voice floating up from the kitchen, and she sounded different. Warmer, lighter, almost pleasant, which wasn't how she usually talked when I was around. I sat on the stairs, knees pulled to my chest, back pressed against the wall where the shadows hid me. "No, it's fine," my mother said, laughing softly into the phone. "She won't even notice, it's just paperwork." I leaned forward, curiosity winning over caution. "She's a child," my mother continued. "It doesn't matter yet. By the time she's old enough to care, it'll all be sorted. These things always work themselves out." A pause, then her voice sharpened, the warmth draining away like water down a sink. "Of course I'm sure, she's not like Chloe." I didn't know why that hurt so much. I just knew that it did. Those 4 words carved something into my chest that would stay there for the next 20 years. She's not like Chloe. I crept down another step, barely breathing. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see the dining table bathed in the yellow glow of the overhead light. Papers were spread across the surface, neatly stacked and organized the way my mother organized everything. She stood with the phone pressed to her ear, a pen tapping against a folder with my name on the tab. "What's not like Chloe?" I asked quietly. My mother turned. Her smile appeared instantly, like a switch had been flipped. It was the smile she used at parent-teacher conferences and neighborhood barbecues, the one that never quite reached her eyes. "Why are you spying?" she asked. "I wasn't spying," I said. "You said my name." She walked over, heels clicking on the tile floor, and took the pen from the counter. She tapped it gently against my forehead, the way you might boop a puppy on the nose. "Adult conversations," she said. "Go finish your homework." But I heard, "Nadia." Her voice hardened, just slightly, just enough. "Go." That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, I found the card. I was sitting at the kitchen counter on a Saturday morning, eating cereal and watching cartoons on the small TV my father had mounted above the microwave. My mother came in from the garage carrying grocery bags, her purse slung over one shoulder. She set everything down on the counter, and when she turned to put milk in the refrigerator, her purse tipped over. Things spilled out: keys, lipstick, receipts, a checkbook, and something else. A thin plastic rectangle with silver edges that caught the morning light. I picked it up without thinking, the way a child picks up anything shiny. My name was embossed across the front in raised letters: Nadia Brooks. I stared at it, confused. I was 8 years old. I didn't have a credit card. I'd never even held one before. I knew what they were. I'd seen my mother hand them to cashiers, but this one had my name on it. My name, in official-looking letters. It felt heavier than it should have. My mother noticed too late. "What are you doing?" Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. I held the card up, not understanding why my heart was suddenly pounding. "Why does this have my name on it?" She froze for half a second. I watched her calculate something behind her eyes. I was too young to understand it then, but I recognize it now. That quick assessment of risk and reward that she applied to everything. Then she smiled, smooth and practiced. "It's for emergencies," she said, plucking the card from my fingers before I could look at it more closely. "Families share things." "But I didn't get this." "I didn't ask for it." "You don't need to remember everything," she replied, sliding the card back into her purse with the same neat, controlled movements she used for everything. "You're a child. Let adults handle adult things." I watched her zip her purse closed, my cereal growing soggy in its bowl. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The word emergency looping in my mind like a song I couldn't stop hearing. Emergencies happen suddenly. Accidents, fires, hospital visits, flat tires on dark roads. The kind of things you saw in movies where people ran around looking worried. What kind of emergency needed my name on a credit card? Years passed and nothing was explained. Only patterns emerged. Chloe got braces, summer camps, private tutors, SAT prep courses, a brand new Honda Civic when she turned 16. I got told money was tight. When I asked about gymnastics lessons like Chloe had, my mother sighed dramatically and pressed her hand to her forehead. "Do you know how expensive it is to raise a family? Do you have any idea what your sister's training costs?" When I asked about summer camp, the one all my friends went to in the Berkshires, she laughed like I'd told a joke. "Camps are for children who need supervision. You're fine on your own." When I asked why Chloe got a car and I got a bus pass, her eyes went cold. "Your sister earned that car. When you earn something, you'll get it too." I learned to stop asking. By the time I was 12, there were entire drawers in my mother's home office that I knew not to open. Filing cabinets with locks I didn't have keys to. Conversations that stopped abruptly when I walked into a room. Phone calls taken in the garage or the backyard, voices low and hurried. My father knew something. I figured that out the night I heard them arguing behind their bedroom door. I was supposed to be asleep. It was a school night, past midnight, and I'd gotten up to use the bathroom. Their voices carried through the walls like they always did when they thought we couldn't hear. "She's starting to notice," my father said. His voice was tired, worn down. "She asked me about the card she found, the one with her name." My mother's voice was sharp, the way it always was when she was being challenged. "Then teach her not to notice. Elaine, she's just a kid who asks too many questions." A pause. "Something shuffled papers maybe, or the blankets on their bed. Handle it, Richard. Make her understand that some things aren't her business." Silence followed. My father didn't respond. He never responded when she spoke to him that way. That silence became the foundation of everything. The only person who ever saw me clearly was Aunt Marie. She was my father's older sister, a retired forensic accountant who lived alone in a small cottage near the shore in Old Saybrook. The kind of place with window boxes full of flowers and a porch that looked out over Long Island Sound. She never married, never had children, and my mother called her eccentric like it was a polite word for something worse. "Your aunt has her own way of doing things," my mother would say, her tone suggesting that this was not a compliment. But Aunt Marie had sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She'd spent 30 years tracking financial fraud for insurance companies, following paper trails through shell corporations and offshore accounts. She knew how to read people the way other people read newspapers, quickly, efficiently, and with an eye for what wasn't being said. She noticed things. She noticed that I wore Chloe's hand-me-downs while Chloe wore new dresses every season. She noticed that I flinched when my mother raised her voice, even if the anger wasn't directed at me. She noticed that I watched conversations like I was gathering evidence, storing away details that I didn't understand but knew, somehow, were important. On my 10th birthday, my parents threw Chloe a celebration party for making the regional gymnastics team. There were balloons in our backyard, pink and silver streamers hanging from the trees, a cake with buttercream frosting that said, "Congratulations, Chloe," in curly letters. 30 of her closest friends filled our yard with laughter and noise, playing games and eating pizza that my mother had ordered from the expensive place downtown. My birthday had been 3 days earlier. No one remembered. I spent my actual birthday doing homework in my room while my mother planned Chloe's party on the phone downstairs. I heard her discussing catering options, balloon arrangements, the playlist for the backyard speakers. At dinner, no one mentioned what day it was. At bedtime, no one came to say goodnight. That evening, after Chloe's guests went home and the house went quiet, there was a knock on my bedroom door. Aunt Marie stood there holding a small wrapped box. She was wearing the same blue cardigan she always wore, the one that smelled like lavender and old books. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed. "I know I'm late, but some gifts are worth waiting for." I unwrapped the box slowly, carefully, because presents were rare enough that I wanted to make them last.
Inside was a leather-bound journal with my initials embossed on the cover in gold. N.E.B. Nadia Ellen Brooks. "Write everything down," Aunt Marie told me, her voice low and serious in a way I'd never heard before. "Every day, every conversation you hear, every time something feels wrong." I looked at her, confused. "Why?" She touched my cheek, and her eyes were sad but fierce, like she was seeing something in the future that I couldn't. "Because someday you'll need proof of who you really are," she said. "Your mother sees numbers, Nadia. She sees balance sheets and calculations and opportunities. But I see you. I see someone remarkable trying to survive in a house that doesn't deserve her." I didn't understand what she meant. Not then. "One day," Aunt Marie continued, "you're going to leave this place. And when you do, you're going to need evidence. Dates, times, details. Write them all down." She pressed the journal into my hands. "The truth is patient, sweetheart, but it always comes out." That journal became my lifeline. I wrote in it every night for the next 8 years. Every argument I overheard. Every strange comment my mother made about accounts and paperwork. Every time money was tight for me but somehow available for Chloe. I didn't know I was building a case. I just knew it made me feel less crazy. And Aunt Marie, she knew exactly what she was planting. At 16, I got my first job bagging groceries at the Stop and Shop, 2 miles from our house. I rode my bike there after school 3 days a week, worked until closing, and saved every dollar I earned in a shoebox under my bed, hidden beneath old stuffed animals and childhood books. After 6 months, I had almost $800. I decided to open a bank account, something of my own, something my mother couldn't touch. I walked into the credit union on a Saturday morning with my Social Security card, my driver's permit, and a sense of purpose I'd never felt before. The building smelled like coffee and old carpet, and there were posters on the walls about saving for college and building your future. My future, finally. The teller was friendly at first. She had red hair and a name tag that said Janet, and she smiled at me like I was a regular customer, not a 16-year-old kid trying to do something adult. "Opening your first account?" she asked brightly. "That's wonderful." She typed my information into her computer, smiled, typed some more, then she frowned, typed again. "There seems to be an issue," she said carefully. My stomach dropped. "What kind of issue?" She lowered her voice, glancing around like she was sharing a secret she wasn't supposed to tell. "Your name is already attached to multiple accounts." "That's not possible," I said. My voice sounded far away, like it was coming from someone else. "I've never had a bank account. This is my first time in a bank by myself." "Not bank accounts." She hesitated, something uncomfortable crossing her face. "Credit accounts, several of them." My blood went cold. I felt it happen, felt the warmth drain out of my body, like someone had pulled a plug. "You should speak to your parents," she said gently, kindly, like she understood something I was only beginning to grasp. I walked home slowly, rehearsing what I would say. I practiced in my head for 2 hours. Different versions of the same questions, trying to find words that wouldn't make my mother angry, wouldn't make her dismiss me the way she always did. But when I confronted her, she didn't even look guilty. She was in the kitchen, folding laundry with sharp, precise movements. My father was at work. Chloe was at a friend's house. We were alone. "Why did you go digging?" she asked. not looking up from a towel she was folding into perfect thirds. I just wanted my own bank account. You already have accounts. No, I don't. Not ones I opened, not ones I asked for. She looked up then, and her eyes were cold enough to freeze me in place. You have what this family needs you to have. I stood there, 16 years old, suddenly understanding something terrible, something that had been hiding in plain sight for 8 years. How much? I whispered. How much debt is in my name? My mother's expression didn't change. That's not your concern. It's my name. It's my credit. It's my future. And you live in my house. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. No love. Nothing but the cold calculation I'd seen in her eyes 100 times before. Families share things, Nadia. I thought you understood that by now. That was the first time I realized the full truth of what my mother was. She hadn't been raising me. She'd been farming me. I knew I had to escape. I couldn't confront her directly. I'd seen what happened when people challenged my mother. She destroyed them with words, with silence, with the quiet withdrawal of resources you didn't know you needed until they were gone. So I did what she'd taught me to do. I planned. I calculated. I built something in secret. I applied to colleges without telling anyone at home. I wrote essays at midnight after everyone else was asleep, hunched over my laptop in bed with the brightness turned down low. I asked teachers for recommendation letters and swore them to secrecy. I applied for every scholarship I could find, need-based, merit-based, essay contests, regional awards, anything that might help me escape without leaving a trail of debt my mother could claim was hers. I chose business and computer science, not because my mother would approve. She wouldn't. She'd call it a waste and suggest I do something practical, like secretarial work, but because I knew I needed to understand money. I needed to understand systems. I needed to learn how people like her exploited loopholes so I could learn how to close them. The acceptance email came at midnight on a Wednesday in April. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred with tears, then covered my mouth with both hands to keep from making a sound. Full scholarship. Out of state. 4 years of room, board, and tuition paid for by a combination of grants and academic awards. Freedom. For the first time in my life, I had a door open that my mother didn't know about. Hope felt dangerous in that house, so I kept it hidden. I locked it away behind the same wall where I kept everything else, the anger, the hurt, the journal full of evidence I didn't yet know how to use. Graduation day arrived on a Saturday in June. Hot and humid the way Connecticut summers always are. I put on my cap and gown and walked downstairs, heart pounding with the foolish hope of being seen. Just once. Just this once. Maybe they would come. Maybe they would sit in the audience and watch me give my speech. Maybe my mother would look at me with something other than calculation. Maybe my father would squeeze my shoulder and tell me he was proud. Maybe they would finally see me as something other than a resource to be managed. My mother stood in the kitchen in a cream blouse and pearls, phone pressed to her ear. She was talking to someone about quarterly projections, her voice clipped and professional. Chloe was at the table, already dressed in a sundress and heels, checking her reflection in a compact mirror and adjusting her hair. The ceremony starts at 2, I said. We should leave by 1 to get good seats. My mother covered the receiver and smiled that same flat, practiced smile I'd seen 1,000 times before. Sweetheart, something came up. My stomach dropped. I felt it physically, like a stone falling through water. What do you mean? Chloe has a luncheon with the Westbridge Foundation. They're considering her for a junior leadership position. She said it like she was announcing a lottery win. It's a huge opportunity, very exclusive. It's my graduation, I said. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. I'm giving a speech. I won valedictorian. My mother's smile widened slightly. That's nice. Chloe finally looked up from her compact mirror. They only invite a few students to the foundation luncheon. It's very selective. I looked at my mother, searching her face for something, anything that looked like regret, or guilt, or even basic human decency. You're not coming, I said. It wasn't a question anymore. My mother sighed, like I was being tedious, like I was a chore she couldn't wait to finish. Nadia, don't make this difficult. You've always been so good at not making things difficult. I stood there in my graduation gown, the one I'd paid for myself with grocery store wages, clutching my speech notes, and something inside me finally broke. Not dramatically, Not with tears or screaming. Just quietly. Like a bone that had been bent too far for too long and finally snapped. "What did I ever do," I whispered, "to make you hate me this much?" My mother's expression flickered. For 1 second, just one, I saw something real behind her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. Like she was seeing me for the first time and didn't like what she found. Then it was gone. "Hate you?" She laughed softly. "Nadia, I don't hate you. I don't feel anything about you at all." She said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather. "You're just not as useful as your sister." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt them in my chest, my stomach, the backs of my knees. Not useful. That's all I'd ever been to her. A tool, an asset, a means to an end. I walked to that graduation ceremony alone. I gave my valedictorian speech to a room full of strangers, 2,000 people in caps and gowns, their families filling the bleachers of the high school gymnasium. I talked about perseverance and finding your own path, about the importance of believing in yourself when no one else does. I said the words I'd practiced for weeks, and I meant every single one. When they called my name to receive my diploma, I looked out at the audience, searching for familiar faces. And I saw one, Aunt Marie, front row, left side, clapping louder than anyone. Afterward, she found me outside, away from the crowds and the celebrating families and the parents taking pictures with their children. She was waiting by the oak tree near the parking lot, the one with the bench where seniors ate lunch. She took my hands in hers. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Her eyes were wet, but her grip was strong. "And I need to tell you something important." She looked around to make sure we were alone. "I pulled your credit report," she said quietly. "Last month. I have a friend at one of the bureaus who owed me a favor." My throat tightened. "What did you find?" "There are 9 accounts in your name now. Credit cards, a car loan, 2 lines of credit, over $47,000 in debt." The world tilted beneath my feet. $47,000. Almost $50,000 in my name. On my credit, building interest while I was doing homework and bagging groceries and trying to figure out why my family treated me like a stranger. "I've been documenting everything," Aunt Marie continued. "For years. Since that day you found the credit card when you were 8, I've been watching, gathering evidence, building a file." She pressed a flash drive into my palm. "This has copies of everything I've found. Applications with forged signatures your mother signed, your name, Nadia, on every single one. Bank statements showing where the money went. A timeline connecting every account to dates and purposes. It's all there." I stared at the flash drive, unable to speak. It was small, silver, unremarkable. It looked like something you'd use to store homework assignments. "Not yet," Aunt Marie said, squeezing my hands. "You're not ready yet. Go to school, build your life. Get strong, get far away from here." Her eyes bore into mine. "And when you're ready to fight, when you're ready to face what she did and make her answer for it, you'll have everything you need." She pulled me into a hug, tight and fierce. "The truth is patient, sweetheart, but it always comes out. And when it does, you'll be ready." I didn't understand the full weight of what she was giving me. Not then, but I would. After graduation, I packed 2 suitcases and bought a one-way ticket to Chicago. I didn't say goodbye to my parents. There was nothing left to say. My mother was at work. My father was avoiding me the way he'd avoided conflict for my entire life. Chloe was at a friend's house, probably still basking in the glow of her foundation luncheon. I called Aunt Marie from the airport. "I'm leaving," I told her. "I know," she said. "I'm so proud of you. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've—" "You don't have to thank me." Her voice was firm but gentle. "Just promise me something. Anything. Go build something," she said. "Something they can never take from you. Something that's entirely yours." I promised. For the next 8 years, I built my life in silence. I worked 3 jobs to pay off debt I never created. Waitressing, tutoring, data entry, anything that paid, anything that would chip away at the mountain my mother had built on my back. I took night classes in cybersecurity and financial systems, studying until 2 a.m. and waking up at 6 to start all over again. I learned everything I could about credit bureaus, identity protection, and the loopholes people like my mother exploited. I learned how easy it was to weaponize a child's social security number. I learned how rarely parents were prosecuted for this kind of theft, because prosecutors didn't want to break up families, because courts were reluctant to believe that mothers could do this to their own children. I learned that I wasn't alone. There were thousands of us, tens of thousands, children whose parents had borrowed against their futures, stolen their names, and counted on shame and silence to keep the secret buried. Every month, I checked my credit report. Every month, there was new activity. My mother was still using my identity. She assumed I didn't know. She assumed I was too stupid, too scared, or too far away to notice. She assumed I would stay silent forever, the way I always had. She was wrong. At 24, I started building something. It started as a simple idea, born from frustration and rage, and the particular clarity that comes from being failed by every system that was supposed to protect you. What if there was a way to freeze your credit instantly? Alert you the moment someone tried to open an account in your name, and create a paper trail so clear that no one could gaslight you into believing you imagined it? I built the first version on my laptop in a 400 square foot studio apartment in Chicago. No interface, no branding, just code, just logic, just the algorithm that would have saved me if it had existed when I was 9 years old. I tested it on myself. Within hours, it flagged activity I hadn't noticed. Soft credit checks, new inquiries, applications in progress. My mother was still at it, still opening accounts, still assuming I was asleep at the wheel. I froze everything. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. My family never asked about my work. To them, I was still Nadia who caused problems and asked too many questions. My mother called occasionally, not to check on me, not to see how I was doing, but to remind me of my obligations. "The minimum payment on the visa is late," she said one evening, her voice clipped with irritation. "You're hurting my credit score." "Your credit score? The account is in your name, but it's connected to mine as an authorized user. Don't be selfish, Nadia. Haven't I taught you anything about how families work?" I was sitting in my office at the time, the one with the whiteboard covered in user acquisition strategies, the one where I'd just closed my first round of seed funding from an investor who believed in what I was building. "I'll take care of it, Mother," I said. "Good." A pause. "Chloe is getting promoted, by the way, regional director at her company. We're very proud of her. Congratulations to Chloe." "Yes. Well," another pause, loaded with meaning. "Unlike some people, Chloe understands what family loyalty means." She hung up without saying goodbye. I looked around my office. Identity Shield Incorporated, my company. $2 million in funding. A team of 8 employees. A waiting list of 15,000 users. My mother had no idea. None of them did. And for the first time, I realized that I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their recognition. I didn't need them to see what I was building or understand what it meant. I just needed to keep building. The call came on a Thursday morning in October. I was reviewing partnership contracts, coffee growing cold on my desk, when my phone rang. A Connecticut number I didn't recognize. "Miss Brooks? This is David Chen, your aunt's estate attorney. I'm calling to inform you that Marie Brooks passed away last night." The world stopped. Aunt Marie was 71. She'd had a heart condition for years. I knew that. We talked about it sometimes. Her medications, her doctor's appointments, the way she had to rest more than she used to. But she'd been managing it. We'd talked just 2 weeks earlier. A long conversation about nothing important that had somehow been about everything. She'd said she had something important to tell me. "Soon," she'd promised. "When I see you next. When you come visit." "What happened?" I heard myself ask. "It was peaceful," Mr. Chen said. "In her sleep, she didn't suffer. I never got to see her again. I never got to hear what she wanted to tell me." I flew to Connecticut the next day. The funeral was small, held at a chapel near the water where Aunt Marie had loved to watch the sunset. It was the kind of service she would have wanted. Simple, dignified, no unnecessary fuss. A few neighbors came, some former colleagues, people who'd known her from her decades as a forensic accountant. My parents sat in the front row, looking appropriately somber. My father's shoulders were hunched. He seemed genuinely sad. or at least as sad as he allowed himself to appear. My mother sat beside him, posture perfect, expression composed. She looked like she was calculating something. Chloe sat next to them, scrolling on her phone when she thought no one was watching. During the reception, I heard my mother whispering to my father. I'd perfected the art of listening without appearing to listen. The house is worth at least $450,000 now, she said. And she had investment accounts. We should talk to the attorney about the will. Not here, my father hissed. Why not? We're family. We're the only family she had. That money should stay in the family. I stared at Aunt Marie's photograph while my family calculated her worth like auctioneers at an estate sale. She deserved better. So much better. We all did. After the service, the attorney found me. Miss Brooks, David Chen said quietly, could you stay after? There's something your aunt wanted you to have, something she was very specific about. Mr. Chen led me to a small office in the funeral home and closed the door behind us. It was a quiet room, impersonal, decorated with landscapes and neutral colors. The kind of room designed for difficult conversations. Your aunt came to see me 3 years ago, he began, settling into a chair across from me. She was very specific about her wishes, very organized. She wanted to make sure everything was documented properly, that nothing would be contested or misunderstood. He slid a thick envelope across the table. Inside were legal documents, account statements, and a handwritten letter on Aunt Marie's personal stationery. The cream-colored paper with her initials embossed at the top that I'd seen 100 times. I read the documents first, 3 times, before the words sank in. Aunt Marie had left me everything. The cottage in Old Saybrook, now valued at $480,000. Her investment accounts, worth another $420,000. And something else. Something that made my hands shake as I pulled it from the envelope. A complete forensic file documenting 18 years of identity theft. Credit applications with forged signatures, my mother's handwriting, impersonating mine, on every single one. Bank statements showing where the money went and when. Recorded phone calls my mother didn't know existed. Emails between my mother and financial institutions posing as me. A timeline connecting every fraudulent account to specific dates, purposes, and dollar amounts. Everything. 18 years of evidence, gathered with the precision of a forensic accountant who had spent her career tracking exactly this kind of crime. The letter was handwritten, 4 pages long, in Aunt Marie's careful script. My dearest Nadia, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything in person. I wanted to. I planned to. I thought I had more time. But some truths need to be written down. Some evidence needs to survive the people who would destroy it. Your mother will be furious when she learns about this inheritance. She's been counting on my money for years. She mentioned it once, casually, at a family dinner, when she thought I was too old to notice. Marie doesn't have anyone else, she said. It'll all come to us eventually. She was wrong. I've watched you grow into someone remarkable, even when no one else was watching. Even when they tried to make you small. Even when they used your name like a resource to be exploited. You survived that house with your integrity intact, and that is nothing short of miraculous. The flash drive I gave you at graduation had the basics. This file has everything. Every account, every forged signature, every dollar, every lie. Use it wisely. Use it when you're ready. Use it when you're strong enough to survive the aftermath. And remember what I always told you. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to survive. All my love, now and always, Aunt Marie P.S. I hear your mother is planning a retirement party for next spring. Big event. All her important clients and colleagues. Everyone she's ever wanted to impress gathered in one room. I've always believed the best gifts are the ones that arrive unexpectedly. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried. There's one more thing, Mr. Chen said gently when I'd composed myself. Your aunt requested that the inheritance remain confidential until the will is formally executed. Your family has been informed about the property transfer. They'll contest it, I'm certain, but they don't know about the forensic file. They don't know what she documented. I nodded, unable to speak. She wanted you to have time, he continued. Time to decide how and when to use it. Time to prepare. I tucked the envelope into my bag and walked out of that funeral home with a secret that would sit in my heart for 6 months. I didn't know then that I'd be using it at my mother's retirement party. But Aunt Marie did. Now, I need to ask you something. If you were in my shoes, if your own mother had stolen your identity for 18 years, destroyed your credit, and still expected you to stay silent, what would you do? Would you expose her publicly? Would you walk away forever? Would you do something else entirely? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what you would choose. And while you're thinking about it, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Because what I did, nobody saw it coming. The retirement party was scheduled for April 15th at the Grand Meridian Hotel in Hartford. 200 guests, 6-course dinner, champagne toast, and an award presentation from the Connecticut Financial Advisors Association. My mother had spent 35 years building a reputation as a trusted financial advisor. She'd helped hundreds of families plan for their futures, save for their children's education, prepare for retirement. She'd won awards, given speeches, mentored young advisors. She'd destroyed her own daughter's credit to fund it all. I wasn't invited. Chloe called me 2 weeks before the party. Not to invite me, of course, just to make sure I knew my place. Mom doesn't want drama, she said. It's her special night. I understand. You're not coming, right? Of course not. Good. A pause. She's getting a Lifetime Achievement Award, you know. The whole industry will be there. All her biggest clients. Everyone who's ever trusted her. I let that word settle between us. Trusted. Give her my congratulations, I said. I hung up and looked at the envelope on my desk. Inside was a copy of everything Aunt Marie had gathered. Every forged signature, every fraudulent account, every dollar, and a letter I'd written myself, explaining exactly who my mother really was. The night before the party, I couldn't sleep. Part of me wanted to stay home, to let it go, to accept that some people never face consequences for what they've done, to move on with my life and leave the past behind me. But I kept hearing Aunt Marie's voice. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to survive. I wasn't flying to Hartford for revenge. I wasn't going to make a scene or scream accusations or cause the kind of drama my mother always accused me of creating. I was just going to give my mother a retirement gift. At 6 a.m., I put on a simple black dress, applied my lipstick, and looked at myself in the mirror. You can do this, I whispered to my reflection. I picked up the manila envelope and tucked it into my bag. I didn't know exactly what would happen when my mother opened it. I didn't know if it would change everything or nothing at all. But I knew I couldn't keep carrying this secret forever. Some truths need to come out, and Aunt Marie had trusted me to find the right moment. As my plane lifted off the runway, I realized the moment had finally come. The Grand Meridian Hotel was everything I expected and more. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings like frozen waterfalls. Marble floors gleamed under soft lighting. Enormous floral arrangements in the lobby, white roses, hydrangeas, trailing greenery, probably cost more than my first apartment's monthly rent. A string quartet played softly near the entrance while guests in designer clothes streamed toward the ballroom. I stood at the edge of it all, holding my manila envelope. I smoothed my dress, took a deep breath, and walked to the reception table. A young woman with a clipboard and a practiced smile greeted me. Good evening. Name, please? Nadia Brooks. I kept my voice pleasant, unremarkable. I'm Elaine's daughter. Her finger traced the guest list. Her smile faded. I'm sorry, ma'am, your name isn't on the list. I expected this. That's all right, I said. I'm just here to drop off a gift. A surprise for my mother. She hesitated. I could see her weighing protocol against the difficulty of turning away the guest of honor's daughter, then nodded toward the ballroom doors. The gift table is inside, to the left. I walked through those doors into another world. The ballroom was magnificent. 200 tables draped in ivory linen, towering centerpieces of white roses and hydrangeas, crystal glasses catching the light from a dozen chandeliers. Waiters in white gloves moved between tables with silver trays. The air smelled like expensive perfume and self-congratulation. And at the front of the room, on a small, elevated stage, my mother stood at a podium. She was radiant in a champagne-colored gown, diamonds sparkling at her throat and wrists. Her hair was perfect, Her makeup was flawless. Her smile was the same practiced, calculated expression I'd seen my entire life. She was wearing the pearl earring she'd bought with a credit card in my name when I was 14. And after 35 years in this industry, she was saying, her voice warm and confident, the greatest lesson I've learned is that trust is everything. Trust is the foundation of every relationship, every financial plan, every future we help our clients build. The audience nodded along. Her colleagues, her clients, her admirers. Without trust, my mother continued, we have nothing, and I'm so grateful that you've trusted me with your futures, your families, your dreams. I walked quietly to the gift table, crystal vases, wrapped boxes in silver paper, gift bags with silk ribbon handles. I placed my manila envelope among them, plain and unassuming. It looked like a document delivery, an afterthought. Then I found a seat in the back row. My mother didn't see me. Not yet. The speeches continued. Her business partner praised her dedication and vision. A longtime client stood up to thank her for 20 years of guidance that had helped him retire early. The association president presented her with a crystal award in the shape of a star. For 35 years of excellence and integrity, he announced. My mother accepted it with gracious tears. Through it all, I waited. After dessert, the MC took the microphone. And now, a special moment. Our guest of honor would like to open a few gifts from her closest friends and family. My mother floated toward the gift table like a queen approaching her throne. She opened the first box, a designer scarf from Hermes. She held it up to polite applause. The second was a bottle of vintage wine. She laughed and promised to save it for a special occasion. The third was a crystal picture frame from her partners at the firm. Then her hand landed on my envelope. She picked it up, turned it over. No card, no ribbon, no return address. Just her name, handwritten on the front in neat black letters. She frowned, slightly confused, perhaps, by the plainness of it and tore it open. I watched my mother's face as she pulled out the contents. First, my letter. Her eyes scanned the opening lines. The words I'd spent weeks writing and rewriting. Dear Mother, this is what you owe me. Her smile flickered. Then she pulled out the first document. A credit application from 2006, when I was 9 years old. Her handwriting, forging my signature. Her signature on the parent authorization line. Her face went pale. More documents, more applications, more forgeries, bank statements showing transfers, account summaries showing balances. A timeline 18 years long. Papers began slipping from her grip, fluttering to the floor like autumn leaves. Someone in the front row leaned down and picked one up. Then another guest. Then another. The whispers started like wind through dry grass. Elaine? The MC leaned toward her, confused. Is everything okay? My mother's hands were shaking visibly now. She looked up from the documents, scanning the room desperately, searching for an exit, an explanation. Anything she could use to spin this in her favor. And then she saw me, sitting in the back row, watching, waiting. I smiled. Nadia. Her voice was barely a whisper. What have you done? I stood slowly and walked toward the front of the room. 200 pairs of eyes followed me. The room had gone completely silent except for the rustling of papers being passed from hand to hand. Murmurs of confusion and dawning horror. I gave you a retirement gift, Mother. My voice was calm. Clear. Steady. The voice I'd practiced for weeks. The one that wouldn't shake no matter how hard my heart was pounding. 18 years of documentation. Every account you opened in my name. Every signature you forged. Every dollar you stole. The silence was absolute. I was 9 years old when you took out the first credit card, I continued, walking slowly toward the stage. I was 12 when you financed a car. I was 14 when you opened a line of credit for home improvements. By the time I graduated high school, I had over $47,000 in debt and a credit score so destroyed I couldn't rent an apartment without a cosigner. My mother's face was gray. Nadia, please. You told me I was being dramatic. You told me families share things. You told me I was ungrateful and selfish and difficult. I stopped at the edge of the stage and looked out at the audience. At the clients who trusted her. At the colleagues who admired her. At the industry that had given her a Lifetime Achievement Award for integrity. She told all of you tonight, that trust is the foundation of everything. I turned back to my mother. This is who she really is. Someone was already on their phone. A man near the back was heading for the exit. The MC stood frozen, mouth open. My father sat rigid in his seat, face white as paper. Chloe was staring at her phone like she could make herself disappear into it. My mother stumbled backward. The Crystal Star Award slipped from the table and shattered on the floor. I turned and walked toward the door. "Nadia!" My mother's voice cracked with rage and desperation. "Don't you dare walk away from me." I stopped at the doorway and looked back at her one last time. "I walked away 8 years ago, Mother. You just didn't notice." I left her standing in the ruins of her reputation, surrounded by the evidence of who she really was. Outside, the spring air was warm and clean. I took a deep breath, my first full breath in 32 years, and pulled out my phone. 23 missed calls already. I didn't answer any of them. Within 48 hours, my mother's career was over. Her biggest client pulled their accounts first, a family she'd advised for over 20 years. Then, the second largest. Then, a cascade. Within a week, the Connecticut Financial Advisors Association rescinded her Lifetime Achievement Award and opened an ethics investigation. Her business partners called an emergency meeting and voted to dissolve their partnership. Within a month, 8 former clients had filed formal complaints. The state attorney general's office opened an investigation. Criminal charges were pending. The story made local news first, then regional. Then it got picked up by a national outlet, running a series on financial fraud. My mother tried to call me 3 times in the first 2 weeks. My father sent emails with subject lines like "please" and "let's talk" and "you've gone too far." Chloe left voicemails that started with threats. "You've destroyed this family and I will never forgive you," and ended with tears. I didn't respond to any of them. But then something unexpected happened. 3 weeks after the party, Chloe called from a number I didn't recognize. "Don't hang up," she said quickly. "Please, I need to tell you something." I waited. "Mom showed me the documents," she said quietly. "The full file. Everything Aunt Marie collected." "And?" A long pause. "She did it to me too." I sat very still. "Not as much," Chloe continued, her voice cracking. "Just a few accounts. She said it was temporary. She said she'd pay it back. She said families share things. Did she pay it back?" Silence. "No. I let that sit between us." "There's a folder in the documents marked Chloe," I said finally. "Aunt Marie documented everything she found. I asked the attorney to include your file." Chloe's breath caught. "Why would you help me? I was terrible to you. For years. I said awful things. I took her side every single time because we had the same mother," I said. "And I know what it's like to realize you were never really her daughter. You were just another asset on her balance sheet." Chloe was crying now. "I'm sorry, Nadia. I'm so sorry." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. 6 months have passed since my mother's retirement party. I'm still in Chicago, still running Identity Shield, still building something that protects people like me from people like her. The company was acquired 2 months ago, $85 million. The announcement made national news. My mother read about it from her lawyer's office, where she was preparing for her fraud trial. I know because Chloe told me. We talk now, once a week. Awkward at first, full of long silences and careful words. But she's getting help. She's seeing a therapist. She's untangling the damage our mother did to her credit and her psyche. We're not friends yet. Maybe we never will be. But we're something. Sisters, maybe. For the first time, my father sent a handwritten letter, 4 pages, apologizing for looking away, for choosing peace over protection, for failing me in every way a father could fail. I haven't written back yet. I'm not sure what to say. But I'm thinking about it. My mother tried one final time. A voicemail left at 2 a.m., her voice raw and ragged with sleeplessness and fury. "You destroyed everything I built," she said. 35 years of work, my reputation, my clients, my family, everything I sacrificed for. You took it all because you couldn't let go of the past. I listened to the whole message. Then I saved it. Not because I needed evidence anymore, but because I wanted to remember something important. I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped pretending. Aunt Marie's cottage is mine now. I visit on weekends sometimes, sit on her porch, watch the sun set over Long Island Sound. I bring my journal, the one she gave me when I was 10. I've almost filled it. The truth is patient, she used to say, but it always comes out. She was right. I've learned something through all of this. The best response to betrayal isn't revenge. It's not proving them wrong. It's not watching them suffer. It's building something real. It's protecting what matters. It's knowing your worth so deeply that no one's opinion, not even your family's, can shake it. I didn't walk into that retirement party to destroy my mother. I walked in to finally be seen. And that envelope I left on the gift table, it wasn't about tearing her down. It was about standing up. For the first time in 32 years, I chose myself. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had to expose someone who hurt you? What did it cost you? What did you gain? Drop your story in the comments. I'll be reading every single one, because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't staying silent. It's telling the truth out loud. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story touched you, if you've ever been used by someone who was supposed to protect you, please share it with someone who needs to hear this. And if you want more stories like this, check out the video right here. I think you'll love it. Until next time, remember, you are worthy of being believed. Goodbye for now.